Hello, hi, and welcome to this London Climate Action Week event. It's titled Paradigm Shift in Financing Climate Action, Practical Lessons from the Least Developed Countries Initiative for Effective Adaptation and Resilience. So hello, my name is Clara Gallagher. I'm a researcher at IIED, and I'm a climate finance advisor in the interim secretariat for LifeAR. So LifeAR being the acronym for the LDC initiative for effective adaptation and resilience. Thank you for joining us today. London Climate Action Week is hectic, and so we're really pleased that you've managed to make time to join us. Please introduce yourself in the comments section in the chat. This is on YouTube and LinkedIn, so that we know who you are. And we'd like the section to be interactive. So yeah, don't hesitate to use these kind of chat functionalities to post comments or to post your questions or share your perspectives as well. So today we're talking about approaches to delivering climate finance, finance where it matters most, to those that are enduring climate change in communities across the group of 44 least developed countries. This relates to topics of locally led adaptation, to practices of fund management, to changing the power dynamics between development partners and countries that receive climate finance. And so I hope that kind of gives you a sense of what we have in store today. We're going to situate this for a minute in how we came to this point with the LDC group's initiative for how they want adaptation and resilience planning to look like. Because I think the climate finance element is really crucial to how LifeAR came about and why we're having this discussion about financing. So the LDC group saw, back in 2019, that this business as usual approach to responding to the climate crisis just really wasn't working for them. After all this time since COP1 began, climate change was getting ever more pressing. And the problems they saw was that when you're looking at adaptation, these projects that came about were quite short term. They were driven by donors quite often. Maybe they were purely sectoral responses. Or the adaptation projects were designed in a top-down way, sometimes from far off capitals of development agencies. They also saw that there were high transaction costs involved in producing programs to fund locally led adaptation. And we're not just talking about the costs of the amount of time and the complexity in responding to different agencies and different donors and their requirements, but also the extensive use of intermediaries between the source of the funding and then where it ends up. And on top of that, the volumes of climate finance that we're reaching communities remains small still to this day, even though they're marginally growing. The LDC group at the time highlighted the statistic that globally only 18% of climate finance reached LDCs, with only 10% of that reaching the local level. And so the LDC vision for 2050 instead wanted to chart a different path to achieve climate resilient people, climate resilient economies, and climate resilient landscapes by 2050. And the route that they saw to get there would be guided by a very different approach to partnerships. These they structured around an LDC ask of the international community, and then also the offers of things that they wanted to make in response as well. These asks and offers were grouped around themes of coordination, of governance, of planning, of capabilities, and finance, which we're here today to talk about. And so I'll just explain that finance ask and offer a little further as we're sitting here today on a financing focus. So the LDCs have said that they will develop strong climate finance architecture with at least 70% of climate finance flows supporting local level action by 2030. And it also talks about delivering more flexible climate finance to the local level, with strong transparency and accountability mechanisms and systems that are governed inclusively. But in order to do that in correspondence, they ask of the international community that they provide high quality, predictable and accessible finance that's able to support that vision of sending 70% of flows behind local level action by 2030. They're also hoping that finance, will be committed for at least 7 years, because adaptation is a long-term program with flexible characteristics, where the program design phase is lengthened so that you can have proper involvement of government, communities and other key actors from the beginning to build a shared idea about what adaptation looks like in that particular place and how to have inclusive decision making. Now, these goals, the asks and the offers, it might sound reasonably straightforward as I'm saying them here, but changing national and international systems to cater for this has been no mean feat, and as we'll hear from our panelists, and it remains an ongoing process of learning and evolving and testing and trying. So I think we'll introduce our speakers in a moment. You'll hear them talking about different parts of Life AR, maybe the establishment phase or the test and evolve phase. So just to talk about what that means and give you a shape of what this LDC Life AR initiative looks like. The establishment phase is a couple of year period to essentially work out how a country wants to develop its own way of flowing finance from international to national, but not just moving money around. It's also about making decisions on how to have bottom up decision making and how to have that inclusive governance that strengthens climate capabilities in communities, that improves cross-sector government coordination with CSOs and so on, how academia can be involved, how the private sector can be involved, and how to have inclusive and gender transformative governance of this decision-making system about how and where money is spent. So that takes a couple of years as kind of these big systemic inclusive practices will take time. Then you would go into the test and evolve phase, where essentially countries take these so-called delivery mechanisms that they've been working on, and then, as the name suggests, they test it and then see what's working and what could be improved and improve it from there. So testing and evolving. That's the stage that 6 countries are at now, and we're going to be joined by members of the Life AR teams from 2 of these. So Malawi and Uganda, the Gambia, Burkina Faso, Bhutan and Ethiopia in the first cohort of countries that are now in this test and evolve phase. And then there are 4 more that are just starting the establishment phase. There'd be Nepal, Senegal, Benin and Madagascar. So with that scene set, I would like to introduce the panelists. We're joined with 3 other speakers that are from different parts of this climate finance chain. We'll be joined by Joseph Apitu, the advisor to the Life AR program in Uganda. He's a member of the Ministry of Water and Environment team that designed their approach to achieving the LDC 2050 vision. We're going to be joined by Gemma Tanner, a team leader of the Adaptation and Resilience team in FCDO, which is the UK civil service, and has been a development partner that has signed the partnership compact for Life AR, underscoring what this principled approach to financing adaptation and resilience could look like. And then we're also going to be joined by Eda Lejonijere, who's the program manager for Life AR in Malawi for the implementation unit. She manages that, and the implementation unit handles the finance and a whole lot more asides, but is the interface between financing between the national and local levels. And I'm just going to edit twice to see which camera is working, but we'll stick with this one. So, hello, welcome. Just a note for the audience as we go through, as I said, please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll be able to put these to our panelists as we go on. So, getting straight into it, Joseph, I thought I might come to you first. Getting these principles, off paper and into real life. We were talking about how with the financing goal, it was that 70% of finance should reach behind community priorities. So how have you applied that in Uganda, and what are lessons that you've learned along the way? Do you want to introduce us to how this has come to life? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Clara, and greetings to all from Uganda. And again, thanks for inviting Uganda to share our experiences on the operationalization of the 70-30% model in delivering climate finance to the communities. Now, as you have already mentioned, Uganda is one of the first 6 pilot countries, and I've been part of this process right from the beginning. And like you introduced me, I'm Joseph Epitu, advisor to the Life Air program in Uganda. Now, going straight to your question, in as far as Uganda is concerned, in operationalizing the 70-30% model, we started with the putting in place a devolved climate finance mechanism, a vehicle that we are using currently to ensure that locally led adaptation climate finance is channeled to the local governments and to the communities, while at the same time strengthening their capacities. But of course, in ensuring that the DCF mechanism works, we had to take some bit of time developing the design note, developing the guidelines, creating awareness on the mechanism, and also bring on board various stakeholders using the whole of society approach. Having designed the note, we went now into operationalization of the mechanism at the lower local government levels, initially by coming out with a budget. What we did as a country was to, first of all, map out the minimum cost of investments, adaptation investments at community level, using existing investments that are currently being put in place by the Ministry of Water and Environment and other sectors. And we came out with an average figure of £36,000 per parish. And we computed this for the 36 parishes in the 12 pilot districts that we are piloting in. And that gave us an overall figure of close to 7 million. So what we did then is to factor in 30% on top of that to make it about 10 million over the next 3 years of the test and evolve phase. So that's how initially we started. Now, to ensure that we, as much as possible, minimize on the 30%, we had to go into a number of mechanisms. One, we had to align our implementation to the existing structures so that we use, in as much as possible, existing government facilities and also strengthen their capacities. Secondly, to minimize on leakages in transfers of funds to the local governments and communities, we decided to transfer funds directly to the user, to the service providers and the beneficiary communities, instead of using the bureaucratic processes in government. The other approach we used to minimize on the 30% was to use a lean structure at the secretariat, with most of the staff coming from the government of Uganda, relevant ministries, and coming along with the government of Uganda salaries. The other approach we used was to deliberately create awareness amongst all stakeholders, right from national, local government, and communities, on the importance of ensuring that 70 to 30% formula works. And that has enabled us to empower the communities to question every expenditure that we have given to them. And we have been very transparent in terms of allowing everybody to know what's available. So we have had cases where we have gone to the communities, shared with them the budgets, and they have questioned some of the activities we have put on the 30%, because everybody now knows if you put more money on the 70%, there's more chances of you getting better investments. And then, of course, concluding this particular segment of the question, the 30% is not cast in stone. As we start the program, there will be more money spent on the 30% side. But as we progress and get more resources, we expect to reduce on the 30% and increase on the 70%. Regarding the lessons learned, one, the 30% model is business unusual, and it takes time to bring everybody on board. So it's a process as opposed to the business as usual project implementation modalities that most of us are used to. Secondly, as I mentioned, to achieve the 70-30% model or formula by 2030, it will be a gradual process. At the beginning, we shall start maybe with the 40, 60, or 50, 50. But as we continue to build capacities and mobilize more resources, the 30% will continue reducing as the 70% the segment increases. Mm-hmm. And of course, the challenge we have right now is that both the development partners and the communities are stuck on the 70-30% model. So they want to see that model working, but it takes time. The other lesson learned is that when you empower communities, then they become very protective of the 30%, the 37, or of the 70%, and they will question every activity that you try to put on the 30%, because they want to see that the 70% keeps rising. Yeah. And then the other challenge, of course, a lesson we have learned that you need data to critically or correctly come in with the correct figures. And you are aware that most countries, LDCs don't have the adequate data. So it's a question of trial and error at the beginning. And then there's also need to invest time initially to educate everybody. And then finally, the 30% model, the 70-30% model can only work if more money is put into the program. But as we speak now, we are having a lot of challenges. You're aware there's a lot of turbulences globally. And for the Life AR, for instance, we have had the USA withdrawing after we are promised the communities. We have mobilized the communities. These are all challenges we are facing. The challenge now we have, like for Uganda, we have brought all the 12 districts, pilot districts on board. And yet, for now, we have money to cater for only 1 year for 4 districts. So how do we address the other remaining 8 districts? So those are some of the lessons we have learned. Regarding challenges, some of them I've already mentioned. One, operationalizing the model takes time. Secondly, there's the challenge of sustainable financing in terms of quality and quantity, which we must address. And then, of course, there's also issues to do with the data, availability of data. So for now, that's what I can submit in as far as Uganda is concerned. Thank you very much, Clara.
No, thank you, Joseph. I think that's a really comprehensive and very straight in at the deep end technical dive into what this 70 and 30 can mean. I mean, with the principles when they're established and the asks and offers, this idea that 70% of finance reaching community investments, of course, means that there's 30% of the funds that is left available to do a lot of the more fixed costs of operating, a high quality system that facilitates inclusion, that has gender strengthening and all those other pieces. And so, I think the way that Uganda sought to implement this by first finding out what a good cost of a typical adaptation project in a community, or some might call it, the absorption rate or something like that, to put it more in those finance terms, how much that is, and then working out, okay, if this is what it costs for this, and that's going to be the 70, what do we then need to spend in the 30 to make this a viable budget? That's really interesting, and thank you for your reflections on the time it takes to build consensus and bring people along, and the transparency as well that this kind of participatory budget process has. So thank you. I think I'll turn next to Gemma, because Joseph was explaining about one of the LDC offers. If now we're turning to some of the LDC asks, and so those asks being part of the partnership compact of Life AR, about how the international community can support the LDC vision for climate resilient communities and ecosystems and economies. So from a development partner perspective, how do you implement business unusual approaches, as Joseph called it, these new ways of working that are more in line with the asks and offers? Have you got examples from how FCDO is changing internal practices or processes to be better aligned with the LDC vision?
Great, thanks. I'll just check you can hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
Great. All right, thanks, and thanks, Joseph, for opening and providing that really in-depth view of what's happening at Uganda, which really illustrates it in practice. I think from, the UK's been involved in Life AR since its inception in 2020. It is definitely challenging business as usual. I would caveat that by saying a lot of the learning that's gone into Life AR and into LLA has been drawn from the wider learning on development and practice, and the fact that we know that a lot of really good, sustainable, more efficient ways of delivering on the ground is actually by engaging with and making sure they're led and informed by communities and those who are actually at the front line of these issues. So I'd say there's a kind of a broader ecosystem across many different disciplines that we should be drawing on and learning from in the climate finance field. In terms of actually trying to implement Life AR, I'd say one of the big strengths of Life AR is its board mechanism, and the fact that we meet together with the LDC frontrunner countries and now the second cohort countries, and we have that very strong platform to talk, because I think one of the challenges about business unusual and changing your practices is that it really requires trust from all the different partners involved. And unless you have that foundation of trust and an opportunity to have open conversations about some of the challenges and barriers from your perspective, it's very hard to move forward. So that's been one of the strengths, I think, of the Life AR setup, has been that board provision. From our own point of view, we've been trying to endorse and really activate the principles and the ways of working, particularly by being able to sign up to provide multi-year financing to program, to ensure that there is that level of predictability and planning. And notwithstanding the comments Joseph quite rightly made about the current changes and difficulties across the finance system, which I might come back to, but that being able to provide multi-year financing and to do that in a way with other financiers of Life AR, that we can put it into a multi-donor pot and allow flexibility of how it's spent and programmed. I think one of the key ways of working in this sort of area is that you need to come up with systems that all financiers can give them the finance through without requiring lots of individual kind of tailored reporting data. And Life AR has done a huge amount on standard operating procedures and other things to build that platform so that we don't have to keep adding to the complexities of the governance, which sort of touches on the 70-30, because the much as you can do to streamline the kind of governance arrangements and the sort of fiduciary standards and those things, the more money you can actually spend at the front line. So I think that's been one of the key things we've tried to do. I think I'd also wanted to highlight that ultimately adaptation and working on the front line, as we know, is complicated. It's not linear, it's very iterative. That can be really challenging from a donor perspective, to be able to explain exactly what the impact is having on the ground. I think we keep trying to come back to it because we're trying to champion that business unusual systems change, rather than necessarily some of the changes that will happen on the ground at the communities. But getting that evidence and narrative right is challenging, and that's certainly a role I think we see as something, as the UK, we really, really pay attention to, and work with all the people involved in Life AR to really gather that strong evidence that can demonstrate that, and I guess give the explanation and the information you need to allow people to buy into this process for the length of time it really needs to deliver, and to understand that, you know, progress will go up and down, and it will be driven by specific country context, and we've got to be patient. So I think, yeah, part of our role is making sure that we communicate that really clearly to people. And I think I just wanted to sort of return to that point about the challenges now of retaining that long-term, patient, predictable finance at scale in the current climate. I think part of it, and the role that we've done, is we've taken Life AR and tried to align it with other investments in climate finance and capacity for countries, such as the UK's Task Force on Access to Finance, and make sure that we are aligning those processes and using discussions and different formats, like through the UNFCCC, to elevate the discussion beyond just the Life AR programme, because ultimately this is about creating systems in country that can attract finance from a huge range, we hope. So part of our role is to make sure we're linking those wider conversations, and then using the lessons from Life AR, bringing that to discussions to the World Bank and others, so that ultimately it's bigger than the Justice Programme, and that we are making it sustainable by bringing the messages, the evidence, building the systems that much broader climate finance ecosystem can hopefully eventually join up and feed into. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think your point about the board is particularly pertinent as well in terms of the governance, because it's not a board that, you know, just features development partners or technicians. It's chaired by the LDC chair. It's weighted in favour of the LDC countries, with then also development partners that have signed the partnership compact. And I think that as you say, the way that the board has decided to guide the governance of, you know, the rule book for how money can flow through the system has been one of the things that's been very, very difficult, but also really, really pertinent to learn from. And I think actually that brings us really nicely into Edda's area of expertise. So as Edda, as I said before, is the program manager for the Life AR implementation unit in Malawi. And I know, Edda, that you've done a lot of work on Malawi's own kind of internalized version of standard operating procedures, and using this as a tool to deliver business unusual in Malawi for Life AR. So perhaps I could ask you a bit more about this. So what has been business unusual in the way that you're managing the Life AR initiative? Ideally, you know, from a financial point of view, because that's, you know, what we're here and interested in. I know that you do a lot to flexibly manage budgets and reallocations so that it responds to community needs. Perhaps you could take us through some of the ways that Malawi has worked to live up to the LDC offers.
Thank you, Clara. So indeed, Life AR has been doing a lot. since the past year when we received the funding for the test and evolve phase of the initiative. Indeed, we do have standard operating procedures that were developed prior to receiving the funds that provides the guidance on how we channel funds for the national level activities as well as for the district and sub-district levels. So we are trying to work towards achieving this offer, of channeling 70% of the funding to local level action. So part of what we have done so far is to come up with budgets that respond to, the climate vulnerability issues within the pilot districts. So in Malawi, we are working in 3 pilot districts of Salima, Mangochi, and Rumpi. They identified one area that will be piloting this initiative in these 3 years. So the communities as well as the districts have been fully involved in coming up with the investments that they would want to see addressing the climate vulnerabilities in their areas of jurisdiction. Of course, with the help of the task team that is working closely with the initiative. So with the budget, of course, like Joseph mentioned, it's work in progress. We are aiming at getting 70% of the funding to local level, with 30% as well as supporting activities in monitoring, evaluation, and learning, making sure that the initiative is inclusive, as well as communicating, to the public on what Life Era is doing. So far, activities that are addressing the various vulnerabilities in the 3 districts, because they are not similar. Each district identified, their activities to be funded. And to facilitate this, of course, we needed to have the funding mechanism, which is the implementation unit, for the funds to be dispersed, to Malawi, and requirements to have separate accounts, from the government accounts that are used, by the National Secretariat here in Malawi. The other requirement was for the districts to also open adaptation and resilience accounts where Life Era funds will be channeled to. So because according to the Public Finance Management Act, the communities are not allowed to, have their own accounts. The lowest institution to have accounts within the government is the district. So the funds for the communities as well as for the districts are channeled into this account. But the budget are demarcated to between the communities and the district activities to make sure that there's not a mix-up between what the communities want to be done and maybe the supporting activities to be undertaken by the districts. And there's also improved accessibility of the finance at the district as well as community levels, because the communities are highly involved. For example, with the grant, when the funds were dispersed, the communities were also part of the signatories to the grant agreement. So they are aware of how much is going into, the account for their local activities, and they know how much is going for the district activities. And they are fully involved through the area development committees, where the chairs, they do co-sign on some of the finance documentation. And when funds are being released, for example, for procurement, the ADC chair, they have to, have that knowledge that this amount of money is going out for, paying the contractor to start working on, drilling a borehole, or, to start building gravity-fed water systems. So,
yeah, no. Sorry, carry on.
With the operating procedures, there's also some business unusual in there, because For example, funds cannot go out without following the categories for signatories. So one of the unusual things with LifeRA on that is that we have included CSOs that are working in climate change activities to be part of the signatories. So the districts, together with the communities, identified the CSOs that they would want to be part of, the checks and balances for the, the account. There was some issues, related to the acts and stuff like that. But because we are trying to push this business unusual agenda, we're able to get the CSOs to be part of, the signatories before the funds are released to for various activities.
Yeah, that's an interesting and slightly different approach to transparency that Joseph talked about. Because I gather the involvement of CSOs is to facilitate more of this whole of society approach to planning and implementing climate action. What kind of challenges were there as it related to the Act?
Of course, since we're working with people that already have, employment elsewhere, sometimes we have challenges in, their availability. But it's not that much. We have seen, because there's a good pool of, technocrats that we are working with. So if one is not available, of course, we are covered by the others that are available. But sometimes you go a step backwards when you're trying to engage someone, looking at maybe the extent of the work that you'd want them to assist you with versus, their own requirements, within their own job. So this is one challenge that I see, but there is an advantage in using the whole of society approach because of the reduced transaction costs. Instead of having a fully blown implementation unit, we are using expertise from the various government departments as well as the CSOs to assist us. So yeah, it's really been working well so far. Yes.
That's good. Yeah, I think that there's just highlighting there are so many different ways that different countries are applying, things that make sense in their own contexts to achieve the LDC offers. So now we're going to come at this point to some of the Q&A from those that are watching, and also from people that we, in the planning of this webinar, we were talking to lots of different people that are into financing locally led adaptation, or that have specific interests in funding community adaptation, to see what kinds of questions they would want to put forwards. And so while some others come in from those that are watching, perhaps Joseph, maybe starting back up with you again. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning that you were involved with LifeAR from early days alongside FCDO and others. What advice would you have for other LDC governments that are looking to fund adaptation locally, and adaptation in particular with the special needs that planning for adaptation has? Like it takes a long time to feel the results of adaptation, that it affects different people in different ways. What advice would you give to other LDC governments looking to follow what Uganda has done? Oh, hang on, sorry, I meant to increase your volume. There you go. Can you hear us? Joseph, you might have muted yourself there. No, I'm afraid we can't hear. Okay, perhaps whilst you work out that little technical difficulty, maybe Eda, I could come back to you. We were talking about, Malawi having the implementation unit. And you mentioned that it was something set up, primarily as a way of managing conditionalities that were placed on Malawi for the funding. But I wonder, with this implementation unit that is, owned within an environmental affairs department, have you been able to, coordinate with other climate projects and programs that are ongoing, and to learn from what they're doing and to share what has been working for Life AR?
Thank you, Clara. I think because we are just in the first year of implementation, we just wanted to get started and see, how we fare in our own proposed investments. But under the learning area of Life AR, we made plans, to hold like workshops so that we can gather information on how we have done in the pilot districts, by also inviting other, projects in climate change to come together and have a learning event where we can showcase what we have done and also hear from them to see how they are doing, adaptation in the areas that they are working with. So, yeah, this was something that we included in our work plan to do this year. But we are going to see, depending on the funding cuts that we've had so far, we'll see if we are able to have such kind of a workshop. But in addition to that, we'll be coming up with a community of practice for climate change practitioners, so that we can, continuously share information on how to do adaptation effectively. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Life AR as an initiative puts so much emphasis on learning as well. I have a learning question that I'd maybe ask Gemma in a second, but I can see one that has come in from on the chat from Ronald Basingi, who's the Executive Director of Earth Savers Movement in the Uganda chapter, who is asking, how can civil society and the private sector participate in Life AR? And, as this is a question from Uganda, perhaps Joseph, if your microphone is back on, you can come.
Thank you very much. My mic is now back, and maybe I'll answer both questions concurrently. If I got your first question right, you wanted us to share what other countries may wish to take into consideration if they are to take up the initiative, and particularly the 70-30 model. One is that implementing business unusual approaches takes quite some time, and you need to set up a very, very strong foundation by putting in place system structures and also creating awareness across board. Secondly, there's need for involvement of various sectors and stakeholders using the whole of society approach. And the other lesson is that there is need for strong political and technical support from the top leadership of the country at various levels, from national to local governments. And then, of course, finally, there is need for sustainable financing. So those are some of the key lessons I will share with the other countries wanting to take up the initiative. But otherwise, overall, so far, we feel that it's a very, very good initiative. And the 70-30% model, if well implemented, is extremely very good. And like I said, the moment we shared the formula with the communities, they are extremely very excited, and they are closely monitoring its operationalization. With regard to the involvement of the CSOs, one of the key principles of Life AR is using the whole of society approach and leaving no one behind. So as Uganda, we have so far been involving CSOs and NGOs in the program right from the beginning, right from the design of the various implementation structures. So yes, the CSOs are most welcome. And even when we go to the local governments, we always encourage them to bring on board local CSOs operating in their localities and implementing life AR activity. I mean similar implementing models. And we also encourage joint partnership in implementation of, for instance, investments or any other activities that are aligned to the program. But above all, we also welcome, new ideas from other partners like the CSOs. I submit.
No, that sounds good. I think highlighting that the problem that was faced maybe under business as usual was that, if you only have one way of thinking about things, you're not going to have the best results. But drawing in others and different perspectives and different networks will result in stronger adaptation planning and inclusion. So perhaps there's another question from Elizabeth Omer, who says, I'm a climate leader here, but accessing the finance for climate projects is usually a big problem. How can you advise me on that? And perhaps Gemma, as part of a government body that provides funds and is a development partner, I'm sure questions like this come through the embassy network and directly to FCDO itself. I mean, how would you advise breaking down that topic of accessing finance for climate projects?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably first start by saying we very much acknowledge it is a complex and fragmented world, the world of climate finance. And I don't know enough about the specific context of Kenya to comment specifically on that context. But I would say it depends at what level you're trying to access climate finance, because it works at multiple levels. The Life AR example and the sort of conversation we're having in the chat about the role of civil society illustrates different approaches. So Life AR work through national government systems and structures and brings in civil society, business, other stakeholders through those sort of mechanisms, whereas there are other forms of climate finance that will go directly through international NGOs and through other local, national and local NGOs that will provide more direct financing to civil society. And they operate in different ways and have different access modalities. We also work through multilaterals. That's a big part of the climate finance, particularly through what we fund. So through the World Bank, through the UN actors, who will again provide different programmatic approaches to structure access for climate finance. So it is complicated, but there are multiple access points depending at what level you're trying to access it. So again, it would depend whether it's local, national, or international sources of climate finance. And I think just to say that's one of the things that we're trying to do through Life AR and the business unusual approach is try and consolidate that kind of platform of different financing approaches and access points into a more nationally owned, nationally led system, which will, we hope, eventually reduce that fragmentation and allow greater efficiency in the system. But it is complicated.
It certainly is. I mean, Edda and Joseph, I'm sure you're also frequently coming up against this question. Do you have any other advice for Elizabeth that was asking?
Well, in terms of mobilizing climate finance, of course, like Gemma has already submitted, is still a challenge. We are going through turbulent times. What we are trying to do as in Uganda right now is to look at other alternative sources of financing, apart from the seed money we are getting from the partners that are supporting us right now, and that is the UK government, Irish, and then Canada. So we are also trying to prepare concept notes and subsequently proposal to access adaptation financing, funds from the adaptation fund through the direct access model. We are also knocking on the doors of GCF. We are also looking at philanthropies. And internally, we are also sounding up our own government to provide counterpart funding. We are in the process of preparing a concept note to that. So we are looking at various sources of mobilizing resources for adaptation financing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps, hopefully, Elizabeth can take heart that we're all in the same boat in trying to work out how on earth to attract climate finance to programs and projects that seem to make complete sense. So the next question that I can see coming through is from Colleen, who is from the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales in the UK. And they say, looking at how climate action is financed in Wales and how we support climate action globally, I would love to hear more about the multi-year financing, which sounds exciting, but also difficult to sign off. There's a second part to the question about collecting data, which I think Eden might be able to speak to afterwards. But maybe let's just for a moment talk about the difficulties of, the goal of having multi-year financing versus the practical realities, where we're all operating kind of within our own constraints, whether that's, as Joseph was saying, making concept notes for central government, as Gemma kind of implied in her opening statement, looking to how to communicate what impact looks like. Perhaps we could speak to this question from Colleen and then save some time to talk about the question on performance management data after. Who should go first? Perhaps Gemma?
On multi-year financing from the UK, we have been able to provide that to Life AR, and we've tried to do that across most of our major adaptation programs in recognition that it's a long-term process, and particularly with governments and communities, they need to have that reassurance of the money will be there for a certain amount of time in order to put the time and effort and the investment needed to create the structures. And it is challenging. All donors are different. Some operate on shorter timescales and some on longer timescales. Sometimes finance is available for 1 year and not for others. I think the really important thing, sort of from the perspective of a program from Life AR, is making sure it tries to gather as much finance from different sources as possible, so that it's not just reliant on the kind of up and downs and financial cycles of one particular donor, but can pool together sufficient finance over a number of years from different sources. There's certainly been challenges in that our financing years and requirements, including from the data perspective, are different from others, and then also different from the front runner countries, and trying to align all the different financial cycles, I think, is something that Life AR has been grappling with and trying to work out systems. So it's definitely challenging, but it's really, I'd say, really essential to allowing this sort of long-term adaptation programming. I think without it, it's really hard to build the trust of the people involved. And there are ways to do it, but it is complicated.
Yeah, I think that question of aligning cycles and time processes and when decisions are made by different governments in different places is really key. And actually, I think that feeds nicely into Colleen's second question, which was about the collection of performance management data. They asked, does the process of identifying what is needed for performance management data, and how do you do it with such a wide range of stakeholders? And I know, Eda, you've been working with the MEL focal point in Malawi a lot on how to engage on data collection and how to link it to work planning and things like this. Perhaps you could speak to that for a moment as the final word.
All right, thank you, Clara. So indeed, we have to measure, the performance of the initiative, in terms of the offers that we have made to the developed countries. So we do involve a number of stakeholders. There's one department called Economic Planning and Development that sits with the monitoring and evaluation under the Malawi government. So this is where we go to ensure that we do our data collection and we provide, the quarterly reporting as well as annual reporting, which is sent to the Life Era board just to show them how the initiative is doing. In addition to this government department, we also engage CSOs working in gender equality and social inclusion, because there are also metrics that we have to consider to show how Life Era is inclusive in addressing the climate vulnerabilities, which mostly affects the vulnerable, including children, women, the disabled, and so on. So yeah, we do include a number of stakeholders to make sure that we are managing the performance. And where required as well, we may have to engage consultants just to do like independent verifications of what Life Era Malawi is doing to ensure that we are keeping in track with the requirements of the manual, as well as maybe checking on the delivery mechanism to see how we are progressing on that. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much. I think, now that we are approaching the top of the hour, and our time for this webinar is always too short, there's some really, really interesting comments that came in and questions. And I think that in particular, you start this webinar as a financing topic, but then you see that no, financing is also a gender issue, a planning issue, a coordination issue, a transparency issue. And so when you're talking about business unusual and financing, it really is cross-cutting across the whole 50 vision. So perhaps, that just leaves me to say thank you and to wrap up. This webinar is the first of a learning series that's going to be taking place over the next half year or so. And the next webinars will be focusing on how Life AR countries and development partners have implemented the initiative along those other aspects, not just finance. And so please, stay in touch and watch this space for more on that front. So let me say a ginormous thank you to our panelists for making time today and joining us from across the world. So we have Joseph Apitu, Eza Lejoni-Jerry, and Gemma Tanner. My huge thanks. My name is Clara Gallagher, and there are others of us from the Life AR Secretariat on LinkedIn and things. So please get in touch and get involved with our learning initiative. So yeah, thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.